ora. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou, katoa. So the Ross Sea Party tent, not as the name implies some kind of marine festival marquee, and in fact it wasn't the Ross Sea Party's only tent. They actually took 2 other pyramid-shaped tents with them as they laid depots towards the polar plateau for Shackleton. But this tent's rather special, and partly it's because one of the few, and it may be the only surviving dome-shaped tents that Shackleton and George Marston designed and used during that 1914 to 17 endurance expedition. Shackleton's tents sank into the Weddell Sea, but this tent survived a return journey to Mount Hope at the bottom of the Beardmore Glacier, which was a rather epic sledging journey of over 169 days. It's quick and easy to pitch. I know this, I've done it myself. This is a 3-person tent, and inside it's surprisingly roomy, as our conservators show. There was easily space for 3 men to sleep in their reindeer fur sleeping bags or to kneel and cook their increasingly smaller and smaller meals over a Primus stove and an Anson cooker. This tent is sooty, beaten, battered, and it's been broken a few times and mended more than once, using cord lashing and bamboo poles. And in this strange and horrible parallel, the Ross Sea Party men made the same repairs to their own bodies, weakened and damaged by acute vitamin C deficiency. Ernest Joyce wrote, "Scurvy has got us, our legs are black and swollen, and if we bend them at night, there's a chance they will not straighten out. So to counteract that, we lash pieces of bamboo to the back of our knees to keep them straight." It's photos that bring these raw stories to life. And the next slide is a clever piece of kit essential for an Antarctic photographer. If you pop the elasticated headpiece around your head and your arms into the sleeves, hey presto, you're looking into a miniature field darkroom lit up by light coming through a red cloth panel at the front. This model was called the Domino, and it kept your undeveloped glass plates protected from the bright, icy light of the Antarctic summer. And this striking chap in his stylish cold weather leather jacket is Herbert Ponting, the man who in his own words claimed that he felt the cold far less than Captain Scott, and is known to us now as an Antarctic photographer extraordinaire. He had a massive lens and perhaps an equally sized ego. Ponting became tutors to others on the expedition who needed to take images to support their scientific studies, such as Debenham, who took the shot of Thomas Griffith Taylor taking shots of Antarctic mountains. Ponting's own book, The Great White South, somehow always makes Ponting the expert, and others slightly lacking. I love his description of Scott's ineptitude. He says, "He would come back as pleased as a boy, telling me quite excitedly he'd got some splendid things, and together we would begin to develop his plates, but when 5 minutes or more had elapsed and there was no sign of a latent image, I knew something was wrong, and I said to him, 'Are you quite sure you did everything correctly?' 'My dear fellow,' this was a great expression of Scott's, 'I'm absolutely certain that I did. I'm sure I made no mistake.' Says I, 'Did you put in the plate holder?' 'Yes.' 'Did you set the shutter?' 'Yes.' 'Did you release the shutter?' 'Yes.' 'Did you take the cap off the lens?' 'Yes.' Then he would rub his head in that way that he had and admit, 'No, good heavens, I forgot. I could have sworn I'd forgotten nothing,' and he would set off again. Nearly 50 years later, a whole new world of possibilities had opened up for taking images of Antarctic terrain and features. In Hillary's hut at Scott Base, there are these 17 cans of aerial film, images taken by Wing Commander John Claydon in January 1958 near the Darwin and Skelton glaciers. I can imagine the Antarctic surveyors and scientists traversing heavily crevassed country with their dog sleds for week after frozen week, returning to base and seeing what they had experienced revealed from above by an aerial photo. John Claydon and his fellow pilot Bill Cranfield used both the Beaver and the Oster fixed-wing planes during the Transantarctic expedition. These planes were used for reconnaissance, for depot laying to support Hillary and Fuchs, and to support some of the surveying parties that were out in the field. The plane would meet them in the middle of nowhere with spare parts and other supplies. Bill Cranfield had a story that was so good it seems made up. And he had to transport a mummified seal from the dry valleys to Scott Base for scientific purposes. The only place for the seal to go was in the front seat of the plane, and so it got strapped in with a seatbelt and off they took, in theory well strapped in. Somewhere along the way the seal slipped forward and jammed the dual control pedals with its flippers. So suddenly Bill could no longer control the plane, and the next 40 minutes were a life and death struggle to try and wrestle the seal off the pedals and keep control of the plane. He couldn't do it, and in the end he had to make a high-speed landing, high risk. He thought it would kill him, but he and the seal survived intact. Seal blubber was a major source of fuel for early expeditions who'd run out of coal, and in the hut at Cape Evans, there's the Ross Sea Party dropped big sticky slabs of this blubber into a hopper on their specially adapted coal range. The sooty smoke from that blubber infused the hut and blackened the walls, covering their skin until they were greasy, and everything they touched turned to black, including the many well-thumbed books and magazines full of romantic stories, news from afar, and adverts for self-improvement. And I can't help but wonder if the adverts for a more pleasing shaped nose seemed a little ludicrous to men who'd barely survived months of sledging in the cold. Those men who, with their bodies broken and bent, their hair a tangled mat, and their sanity stretched thin, returned to the civilization of their built wooden hut, with the clothing they'd constructed from old tents covered in a thick, greasy layer of blubber soot, so ingrained they had to wash their clothes with petrol. Dick Richards, who was one of those men, took to his bunk on return. Laid up in bed with a serious heart condition, he could do little but lie in place, take his medicine of digitalis and strychnine sulfate, and read through book after book, from Elements of Meteorology to Captain Sharky, from science and politics and religion to romantic tales of dying vicars and their devastated girlfriends. These simple, shabby objects were windows to another world for men who thought they might not even be rescued. In the marks left by the sooty hands that held this book open at this page, we can see Richards and his team waiting out the dark Antarctic winter.